Finding Family in the Small Town. Book 8, Love in Harmony Valley Series. By Melinda Curtis. Chapter 1. What do you think you're doing? A deep masculine voice bellowed across the overgrown, wreck-strewn field in Harmony Valley. Brittany Lambridge jumped and thunked the back of her head on the hood of the ancient BMW sedan. Add headache to my list of injuries this morning. I told you we'd get caught, Regina whispered. Britt's sister was the queen of I told you so's. Britt stepped back from the decaying car, rubbing the back of her head beneath her baseball cap. The nip of early morning bit into her scraped knuckles while dewy knee-high grass dampened her coverall pant legs. She peered to the left, then the right, but the rusting, abandoned cars were still rusty and abandoned. No one else was in the flat patch of land with them. No one drove past on the two-lane highway bordering the field. No one stood near the thick blackberry bushes along the river. And she'd been told the car repair shop and nearby house had been empty for at least a decade. Had she imagined the voice? Or... Britt stopped rubbing her head and faced her sister. Don't look at me. Regina rolled her artfully made-up brown eyes and said with disdain, I'm not a ventriloquist. No, but you hate helping me with my art. I love helping you and your hobby, Reggie corrected. I just worry about getting bitten by angry, territorial spiders or snakes, or, she glanced around nervously, angry, territorial property owners. Didn't you hear me? An angry, territorial-looking man appeared from behind a dented gray minivan, striding toward them. I said, what are you doing here? Guilt, disappointment, and a feeling she couldn't name froze Britt more completely than a complicated updo with too much hairspray. The man quickly approached. Broad shoulders, muscular arms, rumpled black hair and... Britt stopped cataloging his parts because that hair glinted almost blue in the sunlight and made Britt's fingers twitch for her hair-cutting scissors. Oh, my, her twin murmured wistfully, having already forgotten her fear of getting bitten. A thin boy appeared next, wearing light blue, grease-splotched coveralls like Britt's and a preteen's poor attempt at a sneer. Instead of approaching, he slouched against the minivan's rear fender, thrusting his hands in his pockets. His dark brown hair stuck out from beneath a faded green baseball cap. Britt's fingers twitched again even as Shaggy Man drew closer. As a licensed beautician, bad hair drove Britt nutty. As did the feeling she could now name, artistic appreciation. Shaggy Man was like a Pollock painting, a riot of energy that was perfect chaos. She couldn't look away. The man stopped 10 feet from her, propping hands on hips. His black t-shirt and blue jeans had seen better days, while those bladed cheekbones and ice blue eyes had probably appealed to a fair share of women. Everything about him said he was the kind of man her mother had warned her and Reggie about while they were growing up, tempting, dangerous, a man more concerned with who warmed his sheets at night than who made his coffee in the morning. That car is mine. Those cool blue eyes of his skated across the landscape with chilly calculation before returning to them. Leave. Reggie glanced at Britt, who reminded herself about big girl panties. She unwound guilt, brushed out disappointment and gripped her defenses as firmly as the socket wrench that she'd been using to remove the BMW's grille. I was told this was Harmony Valley's vehicle graveyard. That the deserted cars and trucks were fair game for picking. The garage over there, this land and everything on it used to belong to my father. His stance remained as rigid as his words, at odds with that distracting, rule-breaking hair. But, used to belong to? What did that mean other than Britt was trespassing? Shoot and darn. It's yours then? The garage and the land? His glacial gaze found hers, so cold it crackled between them like icicles on eaves before they plunged to the pavement. Papers went through yesterday. A day late. That should have been the title of Britt's life story. Let me handle this, Reggie said, half under her breath. She waded through the tall grass toward trouble. In her tight jeans and off-the-shoulder sweatshirt, she looked like she was walking across a catwalk, not the junkyard. I'm Regina. I manage the band B in town. An overstatement. Their cantankerous grandmother owned the modest band B that Reggie hoped to buy one day. And this is my twin, Brittany. She uses junk for her arts and crafts projects. Arts and crafts? Britt bristled. How was she ever going to be taken seriously in the art world if her own family dismissed her efforts? Upcycle artist, she muttered, although based on the Iceman's smirk, the damage was already done. I'm Joe Torino. That's Sam. Joe gestured to the youth by the minivan. He didn't come forward to meet Reggie. He didn't even remove his fists from his hips to shake hands. He held his frown and his ground, not being the type to shake hands with trespassers or fawn over beautiful women. Couldn't Reggie see that? Apparently not. Reggie cast a confused look over her shoulder toward Britt. Being the twin who'd gotten all the good bone structure, Reggie wasn't used to being overlooked, trespassing or not. A breeze blew the wild grass and Joe's unruly hair. The wind swirled and tugged, and then, when neither Joe nor the grass bent, it died out. Britt's hopes of free materials for the gate ornament she'd been commissioned to create nearly died along with the breeze. Nearly. This grill is doing nothing for you. It's just sitting here. I'm not parting the car out. Joe stepped around Reggie to better glare at Britt. Here it comes, the boy said quietly, rubbing at the unruly hair at his neck. I'm going to get that car running and sell it. The determination in Joe's words would have had Britt believing him if it hadn't been for the age of Joe's clothing and the dismissive tone of the boy's comment. Britt returned her attention to the 40-year-old BMW. The faded paint and oxidized patina were nearly a work of art in themselves. But the tires had sunk into the clay soil so deeply the sedan sat on its axles, the wheel wells were rusted nearly clear through, and the interior looked as if something furry had taken up residence. Have you gotten a good look at this car? You'll need several years and several miracles to restore it. Britt swallowed her pride and lifted her voice. I'll give you $50 for the front grille. Joe's jaw worked. He half glanced at the boy and then back to her. Do you have the cash on you? Knowing the answer, Reggie headed toward Britt's small beat-up gray truck. Britt barely had $50 in her bank account, which was one reason she'd moved to Harmony Valley in the first place. Creating upcycle art wasn't cheap. Nor was living in San Francisco. Well, then it's not for sale. Joe closed the distance between them and slammed the hood. His gaze drifted to the BMW's interior, and the frost in his icy eyes thawed a smidge. He may have high hopes for the cars in this field, but he'd learn soon enough that building castles in the clouds would be easier than fixing anything here for resale. Britt loaded her tools into her toolbox and followed Reggie. She'd wait a week, let reality set in, and make Joe a second offer. Maybe then he'd take 25. Grandpa Phil is a simple man. Cold cuts and white bread. Bills paid by check and sent via the post office. Reggie was in glass half-empty mode after their run-in with Joe. He's going to fire you for this. Her sister didn't have to sound so happy about it. Technically, he can't fire me if I'm renting a station from him. But if he does, an hour after their confrontation with the Iceman, Britt unlocked the door to her grandfather's barbershop and propped it open. You can say I told you so. Hurry up, then. I'd rather be in and out before Grandpa Phil gets here. Reggie picked up the back of the rust-speckled antique bicycle and the metal mermaid rider Britt had welded to its frame. What did you think of Joe? Britt hefted the heavy end of her sculpture and backed into the shop. I think he'll give me that grill for $5 by Memorial Day. In her dreams, maybe. But she always dreamed big. At least she had until Dad died. I meant, Reggie waddled in carrying her end. The rear wheel spun between Reggie's legs and the green aluminum mermaid tail swam over her shoulder. What did you think of tall, dark and frowning? He could use a haircut. Just a trim. A crisp cut would imply he'd been tamed. Who tamed a raging storm? Set it down here. When the bike rims rested on the ground, Britt soaked in the familiar ambience of the place. It may only be a two-person barbershop, but it had the stations and the shampoo sink of a salon, much like the places Mom had once worked in. Britt eyed the large, framed mirror hanging over the chairs in the waiting area. A beer brand was stenciled in block letters in the middle of the glass, rendering it useless in a beauty shop. Looking at it made her feel uninspired to do hair or art. I can't work with that hanging behind me all day. Don't change the subject. You thought Joe was cute, too. Reggie smoothed her hair using her limited reflection in the mirror. Admit it. That man is not cute. Snowflakes were cute. Kittens were cute. Snow tigers were lethal. Focus, Reggie. Mirror down. Mermaid bicycle up. Britt tried not to look in the mirror. She really did, but it was impossible not to. Not to look, not to compare. Two women. Sisters. Anyone could see they were cut from the same cloth. Long, dark brown hair. Mahogany eyes. Wide smiles beneath pert noses. Granted, Britt's wasn't as pert, and she could mention more differences than similarities. For years, Britt hadn't realized she was any different from Reggie. Not when they were 5 and enrolled in Miss Deborah's School of Dance, where Reggie was placed in the front row, center stage, and Britt was relegated to the back row with the other gigglers. Not when they were 8 and they'd sung in the school's holiday choir, where Reggie sang front and center, while Britt was assigned to the end of the middle riser next to Olivia Page, who blew the biggest gum bubbles Britt had ever seen. No. It wasn't until they were 12 that Britt's averageness relative to Reggie's beauty sank in. That year, they'd been allowed to wear makeup when they'd gone to the 6th grade promotion dance. Reggie had put on war paint like a professional model, while Britt had declined. Reggie had danced to every song, each one with a different boy. And Britt? She'd sat on a bench against the wall with Margaret Hilden, whose leg was in a cast. Britt had held back her tears until they'd returned home. And then she'd cried on Mom's shoulder, on Dad's shoulder, even on Reggie's shoulder. Later, she'd fought the hiccups while Mom tucked her in bed. She'd kissed Britt's forehead and whispered, "You have an inner beauty, honey. You'll always look better and be more popular if you wear makeup and cute clothes." Even at 12, Britt had understood what her mother was telling her: "You're the ugly duckling who'll never be a swan." Mom loved her, but Mom was in the beauty business, which was all about appearances. Britt and Reggie had shared the same womb. The same bedroom. The same beat-up pickup their father used to drive. But they weren't identical. Reggie had won more points in the gene pool. Reggie looked like she hadn't ingested a carb in years, while Britt looked like she and carbs were on a first-name basis. And from the day of the promotion dance, they'd begun to go their separate ways. Reggie ascended to the throne of Mama's girl, while Britt became Dad's sidekick. He was a metal worker and liked to tinker with cars. The summer after the promotion dance, the neighbors had met to discuss turning their street into Christmas Tree Lane with lots of lights and decorations. Mom proclaimed they had to do it, but since she was always busy working or being a dance mom and Dad hated yard duty, he'd taken out their front garden years ago and replaced it with rock and cacti. He had decided to create a metal forest for Santa. He brought home his welding equipment, along with scraps from the metal fabrication company where he worked. Britt watched him lay out sheets of metal on the garage floor like mismatched puzzle pieces. But when he welded them together, they created the most amazing 7-foot-tall trees. At her suggestion, they took old car parts and a muffler he hadn't yet hauled to the salvage yard and welded them into woodland animals: birds, bunnies, reindeer. Having learned nail art from Mom, Britt painted each creation, adding to the impression of whimsy and movement. They'd highlighted everything with lights. The front yard was unique and beautiful. Britt was hooked. She quit Miss Deborah's dance studio, much to Reggie and their mother's dismay. She quit spending extra time deciding what to wear, although she still didn't go anywhere without makeup. She quit worrying so much about things that she couldn't control, like whether or not a boy liked her. Despite this split, the twins remained close. But they went to different colleges, Reggie to study business, Britt to study art, and later made a practical decision to go to beauty school. In a reversal of Mom's expectations, Reggie had supported herself by working in a hotel, while Britt had supported herself by working in a beauty salon. Did Britt miss sparkly costumes, fancy hair, and dance recitals? Sometimes. Did she miss propping up the wall at all those school dances she refused to go to? Not at all. What she did miss was her dad. He died last year of heart disease after a series of heart attacks and surgeries that robbed him of his strength and spirit. It was a painful and scary end to a man she'd once thought would live forever. And his absence left a chasm between Britt's artistic dreams and her ability to create art. In a word, she was blocked. She hoped this move to Harmony Valley would be a new beginning. She's beautiful, Britt. Reggie touched a spun, floating aluminum tress of red mermaid hair and then met Britt's gaze in the beer mirror, a gentle smile on her face. And so are you. Britt's throat crowded with love for her sister. And don't give me any of those ugly duckling arguments. Joe thought you were beautiful, too. Reggie's smile turned wicked. He couldn't keep his eyes off you. Heat rushed to Britt's cheeks. From his perspective, I was trespassing and looting. He wanted to establish a boundary. That wasn't lust in those cold eyes of his. Britt gestured that they pick up the bike and lean it against the shampoo sink in the corner. It ticked Joe off that he didn't succeed in shaking you. Reggie was still grinning as they shuffled to carry the bike across the narrow room. Guys like a challenge. Correction. Bike resting safely, Britt returned to the beer mirror, peeking behind it to see how it was hung, glad to find a thick wire and 2 big hooks. You like a guy who's a challenge. I like nice guys. Ones who didn't suck the emotional energy, the lifeblood of Britt's creativity, out of her. Grab the other side of the mirror and lift. Hanging your sculpture here worries me. Despite her reservations, Reggie did as Britt asked and helped store the mirror in the back room. She returned to stare at the mermaid. What did you call her? Kira? Don't put Kira up. It's a barber shop, Britt. There's no future for you as an artist in this shop. Agreed. But that doesn't mean I want to work in a plain box or give up hair and go halfsies on the band B with you. Britt pulled 2 utility hooks from her coverall pockets and considered where to put them in the wall. Doing hair here is just to fill the gap until my art career takes off. Do you know how many artists are self-sufficient? Reggie, Miss Glass Half Empty, said. You wouldn't be on your feet all day if you owned half the band B. You'd have plenty of energy and time to make more pieces like this. Was that a hint of desperation in Reggie's voice? Impossible. Reggie had emotional shock absorbers to take life's bumps in the road effortlessly. She planned her future like an airline pilot planned the route to his next destination. She'd never be desperate. Besides, she'd been talking about running the band B for years. It had been her favorite topic with Dad. Britt studied Kira's flowing lines. The effortless wave to her metal hair had taken days to achieve, with Dad on the sidelines cheering her on. She'd never sell Kira because she'd never create anything as perfect as the mermaid again. If I ever create anything again. Britt shook her head. How maudlin. She needed to be more optimistic. And that meant believing in her future as an artist. Help you run the band B? Britt scoffed. Do you know how many band Bs make a profit? Touché, Reggie murmured. That didn't stop her from presenting her case. But owning the only rooms for rent in this town will be profitable when the winery becomes more popular. Wine-thirsty tourists were already making the trek to this far-flung corner of Sonoma County. Can't you see that? The only thing I can see is a blank wall. You know white space bugs me. Britt walked to the truck for a drill and a hammer. A few minutes later, Kira hung on the wall. Her aluminum hands held the handlebars and the rest of her swam whimsically above the bike as if she was riding underwater. Wow. Reggie stepped back to view the piece. People will want their hair cut just to get a look at her. My wallet hopes you're right. Regardless, there was something about the mermaid's balanced, carefree movement that made Britt breathe easier. This sculpture. It's the first one I created that made me feel like a real artist. One that other artists could respect. One that Dad could be proud of. Before Kira, people had looked at her work and said, "How nice." Which was their polite way of covering their real opinion. What is that supposed to be? Britt could always sense the truth by their carefully modulated tone of voice. Which made her resentful of their need to try to be kind. Which made her hate anything other than the truth in all aspects of her life. Reggie hugged her. Grandmother Leona wants you to come to dinner tonight. And I want you to be my partner in the bed and breakfast, but if you become the next art world sensation, I won't complain. Much. Britt smiled at her twin. Lighten up. You'll buy out Grandmother Leona and be a success without me. Reggie didn't look so sure.